This is Out of the Box with your host, Jonathan Clark. Out of the Box, Sunday nights at 9 on Q1043.
Welcome back. Jonathan Clark here on Q104.3's Out of the Box. We're joined in the studio by Jakob Dylan and Andy Slater. The film that they have done is Echo in the Canyon, and the soundtrack as well. The film you can see in New York City at the Landmark and at the Angelica, and the soundtrack available too. All the info, echointhecanyon.com. Guys, welcome. 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. How often does that happen?
Well, I don't know. I don't check Rotten Tomatoes that often, but
that's the thing, though. That's like the measurement now.
Yeah, I know. They tell me it's good.
That's fantastic. Well, congratulations. I watched the film a couple times. It's fantastic. Jakob,
thanks,
you're the executive producer and sort of the host, and Andy is the director. And will the film be streaming anywhere? Do we know that? Not yet, but maybe.
Got to go to the movie theater, old school.
Yes, exactly. And a brief synopsis, the film celebrates the explosion of music that came out of LA's Laurel Canyon in the mid-'60s. The Byrds, the Beach Boys, Buffalo Springfield, the Mamas and the Papas, a.k.a. the California Sound from 65 to 67. Bands came to L.A. because they wanted to be the Beatles. Laurel Canyon became a hotbed of creativity and collaboration for a new generation of musicians. The first time I got to L.A., I was working for a record company, and of course I rented a red convertible, and I drove up Laurel Canyon hoping I would see somebody famous because I had heard all these stories. Such a romantic sort of thing for me, the music that we all love. Jakob, you get amazing stories in this film. I've never heard these stories before from Brian Wilson. Is it hard? Was it hard for you to become the interviewer as opposed to the interviewee?
Not really. I mean, it was. I didn't see it quite as interviewing. I saw it more as conversations. I suppose. If I thought about it as interviewers, then maybe I'd been a little put on. But would have maybe been a little more awkward for me. But I don't have a lot of experience interviewing people. I have a lot of experience having conversations with other musicians. So I just kind of went it with that attitude.
So it's probably an easier thing to do it that way. You guys are both New Yorkers. I just realized this, right? Originally?
You got it.
I was here for 20 minutes or so. I didn't last long.
Were you born in New York City?
I was born in Greenwich Village, yeah.
Greenwich Village. And Andy?
Well, I grew up in Forest Hills, a hotbed for, the Ramones.
That's
and
right.
Paul Simon and Steely Dan and all kinds of great stuff. Mountain.
And the resurgence of Forest Hills Stadium.
A lot of stuff went on there, my friend.
Yeah. And Andy, you guys, you go back to the Wallflowers album, right? Wallflowers, a couple of albums, I think, right?
We go back further than that, actually.
We go back.
You can, if you want to.
Well, we go back to Warren Zevon.
Right. Let's get into that. Now, you mentioned this before the interview. You were going to tell me a story about how you sort of met Jakob because of Warren.
The story we were talking about it was before that. But I was working on a Warren Zevon record, and Jakob came to visit the studio, and REM was there, and we were tracking with Warren.
Oh, just some band called REM.
Well, at the time, it was. I think they were. I think at that time, they were maybe still on IRS Records. Yeah, well, it's before that.
Oh, okay.
It's before that.
Yeah.
It's before Orange Crush. But anyway, Jakob was there, and that's how we met. It's the story itself is not as colorful as as the other stuff with Warren, because Warren was a very colorful character.
You have said that, Andy, that this era of music was really impactful on your life, and I guess it was, because both as a fan and then as a career choice, right?
Well, growing up in New York, I wasn't old enough to go to see this music. My parents would never let me go. I had to go to the cinema to see the music that I love because, I couldn't go to the Fillmore and I couldn't go see the Beatles play at Shea Stadium, even though my cousin was there. And in going to the movie theater and seeing Woodstock and Help and Mad Dogs and Englishmen and Monterey Pop, I think my DNA was forever changed. I said, "Ooh, I have to do this." And at that time in New York, I mean, even AM radio, we had WMCA, you had WABC.
Right.
That's where I heard those songs. I heard California Dreamin' and I heard Good Vibrations. And I was playing in my little concrete park, playing stickball and stoop ball. And to me, the idea of this place at the edge of the country where the sea would hit the mountains, and you know, and all of this, people running around in bikinis and surfing. It was, you know, was a sort of dream, you know, a place we all wanted to go to. Maybe there was a better life where I was living.
Yeah. Jacob, I have not seen this movie, Model Shop, but tell me about this movie that sort of inspired.
Well, I guess it was just a. You could probably, can you find clips of it online?
There's clips in the movie, but of your movie.
I just had a look, and you know, Andy and I both spending a lot of time driving around Los Angeles. It looks very much the same.
Wait, stop there. The car you're driving in the movie? What kind of car is that?
That's a '67 Firebird. That belongs to Andy over here.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We'll go on.
That's not a stunt car. That's not a movie business kind of car. That's a real car that Andy owns.
Nice.
Yeah. Well,
but you know, it looks. So many of the landmarks do look the same. I mean, that footage, you can't duplicate the way that film looks.
Yeah.
You know, I guess I mean, I don't know if you really could, but it just reminded us a lot of the places that we drive around to, and it had us thinking about Los Angeles. And it's a very subtle. You know, I travel a lot, and most cities have these landscapes or these great histories that people talk about. Their downtowns all have like a shape, and you know, people don't suggest the same about Los Angeles. I think it's a little more subtle than it because it's so sprawling. It's
right.
not.
It's
spread out. Clumped together like most downtowns, but it is a wonderful city. It is a unique looking city, and that's where we kind of saw that a bit of that in the footage, and kind of inspired us to dig in a little bit.
You know, I think you get to a place in your life where you don't know where you're going to be going next. You know, and I think for both of us, Jacob had made a bunch of records and done that touring cycle, and I had just left Capitol, and so sometimes you have to look at where you've come from to know where you're going to go. And for some reason, when we were sitting in my house and that movie came on and we saw it, it just reminded us of a time, an innocent time in California. You know, maybe the contemporary music business was getting stranger to us, so we were going back to look at the reason, at least for me, the reason I came to California, and that movie represented that. And so we didn't set out to make a film. You know, we set out to record music. That's how it started. And we picked these songs. You know, nobody wants to hear another version of Good Vibrations, but we picked songs that had stories in them. And those stories became interesting in that they were the defining moments in a way for those bands. You know, Go Where You Want to Go, which is the first single from the Mamas and Papas that's on the record, you know, that was a song that sort of defined the relationship between John Phillips and Michelle Phillips.
Right.
And as we know, they both had different ideas about what their relationship was like. And, you know, for the Byrds, Going Back was a pivotal moment with David Crosby. And for the Buffalo Springfield, Expecting to Fly is that moment where Stephen realizes that maybe Neil Young is going to go off on his own and forge his own path. So that's really the arc of the film.
We're speaking with Jakob Dylan and Andrew Slater. The film is Echo in the Canyon. The film and the soundtrack, everyone should go see it. All the info, echointhecanyon.com. Tell me about this interview with Tom Petty, Jacob. It was one of the last ones that he did. It sort of opens the film. You guys were at, I guess, a guitar store, right? Somewhere in L.A.? Somewhere you shot that, but you see this Rickenbacker, not Rickenbacker, guitar. But tell me about talking to Tom and that scene, because it's really sort of pivotal, because it sort of ties into the importance of the 12-string Rickenbacker.
Well, right. You know, I'm sure we would have figured out. We would have gotten to the bottom of the Rickenbacker story one way or another, because it does become the centerpiece of the film, really. You know, which I think we had a hunch, but it becomes really clear throughout the interviews, talking to people, that it really the Rickenbacker really does. It is a turning point when that 12-string is discovered. But Tom, we filmed him in Los Angeles at a place that we know in the neighborhood called True Tone in Santa Monica. And we closed down the store for Tom so we could interview him, which I think he had a nice time that day. I mean, I don't know how many guitar shops he gets to wander through anymore.
Right, yeah.
So, you know, he you know, it's unfortunate, of course, that was his last interview, but he gave us so much that was so important and so necessary that I'm not even sure we knew that when thinking of having him talk, because he was a little bit later in the filming, but his stuff becomes hugely important. It's not just commentary, it's just not bits and pieces and funny stories. His stuff is wildly important because of him being a teenager when that music was impacting him.
Yeah, Gainesville, Florida, and he tells a story about calling the radio station and winning a copy of Pet Sounds.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. It is so great. Everyone should go see this movie, Echo in the Canyon, Jakob Dylan and Andy Slater. So tell me the sequence of events. Did the movie happen and then the idea of the corresponding soundtrack and the concert at the Orpheum? How did it all sort of happen?
It evolved pretty much as I told you. You know, we wanted to go and look at these songs, and we started to figure out how to make a record. And, you know, behind every song is a story, and behind these songs were bands, and inside those bands were, you know, was a kind of echoing creativity going back, because they all had multiple singers and they had multiple songwriters, and it was a very unique time because they all came to California in search of that dream, you know, of being the Beatles. What they saw on A Hard Day's Night, this being in a band seemed cool at that time. You know, you could run around, and it's like being in a gang, you know, and play music. And I think so. When we started to look at the songs and the stories really behind the songs, we wanted to know a little bit more. And because we could talk to these people, we just said, well, maybe we should really go do this. I mean, I originally went to another filmmaker. I mean, I'm not a filmmaker, and I didn't, you know, think that I would just make a film. That's a little out there. And so I went to a very experienced documentary filmmaker, two of them, and one of them said to me, yeah, well, I don't know, I'm doing this other stuff, and I don't know. And then another guy said, no, that's a good idea, I need $2 million. And I said, okay, well, okay. So somebody said to me, look, why don't you do it, and we'll fund it. And you know, luckily, you know, having Jakob as a partner, you know, enables you to do a lot of things and get to a lot of people. And like he was saying, we filmed a conversation. Right. You know, we have two artists talking. And to me, I mean, I've looked at a lot of films, a lot of documentaries, and I just wanted to make something that was more personal. And because we love those people, you know, those songwriters and whoever was still around, and I wanted them to look good. Because I saw all these films like there's you know, I mean, there's great stuff that's a little bit more pedantic about Laurel Canyon. There's a BBC documentary that's very good, but people look like terrible. It's like there's a plant behind a guy's head and he's shot from underneath, and it looks like...
Yeah, I was going to say, there hasn't been a film sort of like this, done this well and this way at all, I don't think, about Laurel Canyon.
Well, you know, we just made it from the heart. I mean, it starts from there. We didn't do it. We're not professional filmmakers. We didn't want to make money. We love these artists. We love these songs, and let's capture this while we can, because we can.
And some of the songs on the soundtrack, Go Where You Want to Go, featuring Jade Castrinos from Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros. In My Room, which is brilliant, featuring Fiona Apple. Never My Love, Norah Jones is on there. It Won't Be Wrong, Fiona Apple again, No Matter What You Do, featuring Regina Spektor. Questions, featuring Eric Clapton and Stephen Stills. That's a great moment in the film, Jakob. You got to speak to Eric Clapton. You got to speak about Stephen Stills, about a party that happened in Laurel Canyon where the cops came. Eric Clapton got arrested, and Stephen Stills ran out the back window. I mean...
Yeah, well, Stephen tells the story. I guess they corroborate together, don't they?
Yeah, they do. You know.
Well,
but you know, you're getting to hear very personal stuff. I'm not so sure that story would have been told to you.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. I mean, you know, that's why it's just so great to have, you know, an interviewer like Jakob.
Anyway. Hard-hitting journalist.
Yeah, he's got the magic. Look out.
Fiona Apple, it was so great to see her on stage. I mean, the last time I heard from Fiona was like the theme song to The Affair on Showtime or whatever. God, she was great.
She is one of the greats, but you know, she doesn't crank them out like Ford's on an assembly line there.
Yeah.
And that's why there's never a wasted word in those songs.
Jakob, where did you interview David Crosby? Where was that? It's beautiful.
Well, it's Northern California.
Yeah, because his mountains are in the back.
Yeah, that's his neck of the woods. It's a short drive for us coming from Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Most of the people, you know, if they're not living in Los Angeles, we're going to go to them.
Right, yeah, exactly. And speaking of David Crosby, he tells a funny story about rehearsing with Roger McGuinn and Gene Clark in a studio doing Mr. Tambourine Man. And then he says, and then Dylan walks in, and you're like, you're going to have to be more specific. Fantastic part of the film. I thought that.
All right.
Brian Wilson in the film, he comes into the studio where you're trying to record I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. That must have been a little surreal because he comes in and he sits down to the piano. Is that intimidating? Is it awesome? Is it all of the above?
It's all the above, of course. I mean, he's one of the absolute greats. When the word is the word is way overused today in general in our culture. The word genius. I mean, it doesn't mean half of what it used to mean.
Right.
And then you're reminded when someone like that does come in the room, somebody who did all that work alone. We've talked about a number of times that the Beatles had George Martin, of course, but they also had John Paul and George. They had each other. They had other Beatles within the Beatles. But Brian didn't. He had talent around him. Of course, he had the Wrecking Crew, but he did the most of it all on his own. It's such a young age. So when he does come in the room, of course you're gonna feel that.
Yeah. And I learned that, and I didn't know this. I maybe sort of suspected it, but hadn't realized it internally that, Brian's songwriting ability was influenced by classical composers, right? Like Bach and things like that. And that also that Brian heard Revolver, which then influenced Pet Sounds, and then the Beatles heard Pet Sounds, which influenced Sgt. Pepper. I knew that part, but I didn't know the Revolver part from Brian's side. That was fantastic. You got interviews with Stills, Crosby, and Nash, but no Neil. Did you try to talk to Neil?
Well, here's the thing. We wanted to use the Neil thing that we have in the film as the ending of the film without giving it away. And because, there's 3 distinct periods in Laurel Canyon. There's the period that we're examining, which is when all the bands come. They want to be like the Beatles. And then there's the psychedelic period. And then after that, and drugs get crazy and things get dark occasionally. And then there's the, search for the individual and the retrenchment to like country rock and those kind of things. And that gives you what everybody knows is Laurel Canyon, which is Joni Mitchell and Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. So Stephen Stills says in the end, Expecting to Fly was like a warning. It was a warning to him because Neil was doing it in the studio alone and he was about to forge his own path. And Beck says in the film, at the end, maybe it started with the optimism of the Beatles in '64 and Night at Sullivan, and then it changes and it's about the individual. And Regina says when creative people are striving for things, they don't want to compromise. So we had, Neil in the end playing, this psychedelic guitar solo and again, you see him in the footage as the footage rolls backwards. You see him in '65, and then bam, there he is in present day. So it's
Dick
like
Clark
it's like an echo. It's like an echo from the time before to the time now. So it was such a powerful thing. If you start to put him in throughout the film, then you lose your ending, and then what do you do? And do you need him to tell the story? Because you have to tell the story. It's all about storytelling.
Yeah,
and it's not about star power. It's about the story of the echo of people's creativity. And so we made a conscious decision to do it that way.
Yeah. Well, it works because I think at the end of the movie, he's like jamming, right? In the background, the credits are sort of rolling. And then
he's playing
that's
live.
Neil.
He's playing live right there. He's recording, which is on the record, which is, on the soundtrack.
Yeah. Well, everybody needs to go see this movie. I've been telling you, echointhecanyon.com is all the info right there. Get the soundtrack. It's fantastic. Guys, well done. Really, really fantastic film. 100% on Rotten Tomatoes is amazing. So congrats on that. And
we hope it stays, but we're realistic.
And come back anytime, guys. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
John.